Good morning, everybody. Let's see, this morning we've got my father, Dr. Wallach, again with the Doc Monday. Let's see, last week we pretty much talked about selenium and issues with absorption and absorbability like gluten intolerance and so forth. My father has lectured for decades about it's not so much what you consume, it's what you're not consuming that is a big factor in your diet, or it's what you're not absorbing is probably even more accurate, because if you're unable to absorb nutrition and nutrients, then obviously you're missing out on those even if you're consuming them. So last week we spent a lot of time talking about selenium and the benefits of selenium and my father's research around selenium. But we also talked about things like our health claim petitions that Dr. Wallach has spent a tremendous amount of time and money filing for the good of the general public around the world as part of his education mission. His whole reason for doing what he does is educating the general public on the benefits of proper nutrition and better nutrition and health through proper and better nutrition. And I guess I just want to start this morning with one thing, and that'll kind of start off the conversation. I think, in 2003, the Executive Office of the President, called the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB for short, put out a press release, which they do from time to time, but it's kind of unusual, especially when it comes to nutrition, because the Office of Management and Budget is what it sounds like it is, management and budget. And so it's really a financial aspect of the administration. And so in 2003, this is dated May 28th, 2003, for immediate release. In order to save lives, OMB urges revising dietary guidelines. That sounds great, and it turned out to be great because it's what we've been talking about forever, I think. So new information on reducing heart disease risk is encouraged. Washington, D.C., OMB today urged the Departments of Health and Human Services, or HHS, and Agriculture, USDA, to revise the nation's dietary guidelines to include new information that omega-3 fatty acids may reduce risk of coronary heart disease, or CHD, while trans fatty acids may increase the risk of CHD, since CHD kills over 500,000 Americans each year. Even a small improvement in dietary habits could save thousands of lives. And a copy of the letter to HHS from OMB was attached to that. And I think we have this up on wallachfiles.com. And we certainly made a trifold brochure out of that and sent it out to everybody as part of our educational process. And again, they talk about 500,000 Americans die each year from coronary heart disease, and that's as of 2003. And we also, as part of our coalition of filing health claim petitions, worked with an MIT PhD, and he felt that simply by educating the public about what we're talking about could save up to 1.5 million Americans per year. And it's interesting, it's tragedy, and it's in the news nonstop right now about the coronavirus, and tens of thousands of Americans have died from this already this year. And like I say, that's a tremendous tragedy. But each year, 500,000 to 1.5 million Americans die from coronary heart disease. And we can have a big impact in improving those statistics. And I believe all that we've been doing as my father's research, my father's mission, Longevity's mission, all of your contributions have played a big part of improving people's lives. And I'll get into our legal resume that we've kind of referenced throughout some of these calls, and all the things that we've submitted and done, and the health claim petitions and filing of all those, as to why we've done that and what we've done as well. But one thing you continuously hear around this news cycle of the coronavirus is underlying conditions. People with underlying conditions are at much greater risk of fatality from the coronavirus. But that's true of the flu also. And so this is why, we have made this just such a huge mission to improve people's understanding of proper nutrition and health and wellness through better nutrition. And again, it's been my father's life's mission to help educate the world on these topics. So with that, Dr. Wallach, good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you doing?
Good. So why don't we get right into it? The emphasis today is essential fatty acids, and one of our key products with EPA and DHA is EFA plus, and it's part of the 90 essential nutrients that you encourage people to consume every single day. It's part of the Healthy Body Packs. It's a cornerstone set of nutrients. So why don't we jump into really how that all plays into the 90 essential nutrients, and are essential fatty acids affected by things like gluten intolerance also. And so we can kind of go down the path of that to start with, and we'll get into the health claim petitions a little bit more, I think, as we go also.
Okay, well, thank you very much for setting all this up and laying the framework for this interaction here. Basically, omega-3s, whether it's our EFAs, which are from plants, and EFA pluses, which are from fish oils, are essential nutrients. They're part of the 90. And basically what they do is many things, but one of the things they do when you're talking about cardiovascular disease is they prevent blood clots. And when they're talking about coronary artery disease, they're really talking about blood clots in the coronary arteries, in the brain, in the carotid artery in the neck, in the kidneys, and lungs, pulmonary embolism, all over the place. Those kind of blood clots are caused by a deficiency of omega-3s. Now, one of the key outside sort of hints you're going to get, people have rosacea. They look like they have kind of the ruddy cheeks, psoriasis, eczema, dermatitis, acne. These things are all due to deficiencies of the omega-3s. And when you have injury to your intestines from gluten, and the villi are going away and gone, and you just have almost like leather lining your intestines instead of a moist membrane like in your mouth, you cannot absorb these omega-3s. And so these are the people who get the rosacea and eczema and psoriasis and blood clots and kind of thing. Asthma is another deficiency, a disease of omega-3s. And the kind of interesting thing about it is, if you have fibromyalgia, but you're getting plenty of omega-3s, you won't have a rash on your face. But if you have fibromyalgia and you have a rash on your face, they call it lupus. They say, oh, you have an autoimmune disease. No, it's still just a gluten intolerance, not able to absorb. Even if you're supplementing, you can't absorb efficiently the omega-3s. Now, when it comes to blood artery plaque, or they're sort of mixing things up there. They talk about plaque in the arteries. This is due to inflammation. Cholesterol has nothing to do with the deposits in the arteries. Cholesterol has nothing to do with cause of the plaque. Cholesterol has nothing to do with heart attacks. That was all due to misdirect people when the pharmaceutical companies came out with drugs to lower cholesterol. And so that was a big misdirection there. Cholesterol is your best friend. 75% of your brain weight is cholesterol. If you get on a statin drug to lower your cholesterol, you're going to get Alzheimer's disease. 95% of the weight of testosterone is cholesterol. So if you're trying to avoid that and taking the statin drugs and not eating eggs and so forth, you're going to have ED. And women who don't take in enough cholesterol, they'll go through menopause at age 20 because they're not making enough estrogen. So the EFAs are a big, big part. That's why we have the EFAs and EFA pluses both in the Healthy Brain and Heart Pack. And with this coronavirus thing going on, you hit the nail on the head that these pre-existing conditions increase your risk of death, increase your risk of death from the coronavirus by 98%. Okay, and we're talking about high blood pressure, diabetes. High blood pressure alone is found in 76% of the people who die from the coronavirus. Diabetes is like 46%. Heart attacks is 27 point something percent. Okay, oops, is it me or you? Oh, sorry, I thought I turned my phone off.
You're fine.
At any rate, I'm innocent. But at any rate, it's essential to get rid of these pre-existing conditions before you get the coronavirus. And then when little kids, they're 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 years old, they get the coronavirus, they get mild common cold-like symptoms. It's only when you're over age 65 that you're threatened with death. Why is that? Well, that's because you have osteoporosis and your bone marrow cavity is filled up with scar tissue. You can't make white blood cells, which are kind of the Marines and the cavalry get called to go kill and eat the viruses. Your stem cells can't make antibodies to go kill the viruses because your bone marrow cavity is now just scar tissue. And people don't realize when the doctor says, now take care of your immune system, take care of your immune system, but they never tell you how to do that because they don't even know. They don't know. Doctors don't know. Your immune system is your bone marrow cavity. And so kids, when they're just little kids, their bone marrow cavity is good. But as you get into your 20s, you start getting some little things going on there because you're eating gluten and you can't absorb the nutrients necessary, including connective tissue in your bone marrow cavities, and you start getting respiratory stuff that puts you in the hospital for 2 weeks on respirators, you're out, you're good. But then 2 months later, you get the coronavirus again infection. Oh, you got reinfected. No. When they give you IV vitamins and minerals and electrolytes in the hospital, because you're dehydrated and all that kind of stuff, because you have coronavirus, you're bypassing the intestines. You don't have to absorb it. They're bypassing with the IVs. You come out and you go back to eating your gluten again. And even if you're supplementing, you can't efficiently absorb that stuff. And so you come up with active coronavirus again. So this is not complicated, but there is things that we have to proactively do. I mean, really proactively, because, you're talking about people on kidney dialysis. So this is a artery problem. It's not really a kidney problem. I deal with people who haven't urinated in 10 years, Steve. And they're on dialysis 6 days a week. And we put them on our program. We give them the Healthy Brain and Heart Pack. We throw in the Ultimate Daily Classic tablets, which supports healthy blood pressure and blood flow through blocked arteries. And in 2 to 6 weeks' time, they're peeing at a regular basis, regular volume, and they're totally off of their dialysis. They'd been on dialysis 6 days a week for 10 years. And
a huge part of what you talk about, and you constantly remind people, I hear it all the time when you're talking to people or on the radio or what have you. Your lecture tapes, your books, you talk about the 12 bad foods, and you've got to get off of these foods that contribute to gluten intake, and gluten
and inflammation.
It leads to inflammation, which causes all sorts of bad things to happen, right?
Yep.
And so that's a huge part of what you talk about is nutrient deficiencies and gluten kind of downstream problems that it leads to.
That's right. And of course, we knew this 8,000
lack of absorption through either lack of intake or lack of absorption through inflammation of the gut, basically.
And see, this is not a new thing. We knew this 8,000 years ago. There was a Greek physician, and I have his name written down someplace, but this Greek physician 8,000 years ago said, everybody who has celiac disease, which is a big problem, absorption problems and bowel problems and bloody stools and everything. This was a big problem 6,000, 8,000 years ago. And he said, everybody who has celiac disease eats wheat. He said that 8,000 years ago. 2,250 years ago, 250 BC, a Roman physician said, most common side effect of chronic celiac disease, remember, this is 2,250 years ago, most common side effect of chronic celiac disease, which is constant consumption of wheat, Romans, Italy back then, pasta, well, is what? Oh, osteoporosis. Your bone marrow cavity is filling up. They didn't have microscopes back then, so they couldn't see that the ability to make white blood cells and antibodies was gone, but they just knew that people had osteoporosis and fractures and pain and all this kind of stuff 2,250 years ago. This is not a new thing. And doctors think this is an aging process. Babies are born with osteoporosis because the mother doesn't have the nutrition to give the embryo. And so the babies can be born with osteoporosis. It's not an age thing. It's a nutritional deficiency thing. And so we got to get rid of these pre-existing conditions. We can end the death rate from the coronavirus in weeks and certainly months by getting everybody off of gluten, getting them on the 90 essential nutrients, and staying away from the bad foods so you reduce and eliminate the inflammation.
Absolutely. And again, going back to the late 70s, I knew you then. And but I remember you teaching nutrition at the National College in Portland, Oregon.
That's correct.
And I remember, I sat at your clinics. I would sit at home and hear you talking on the telephone to people, and certainly lived, through what we had in the house to eat. But, I remember you then talking about celiac disease and educating people on celiac disease and gluten intolerance and wheat intake and things like that, among other things, sugar being a big part of that also. But, I perceived that you certainly were among the very first to be educating people on these the whatever you want to call it, the tragedies of these bad foods. I didn't realize that it was actually 2,500 years earlier that people were talking about it. But certainly in modern times, you were among the first I ever heard talking about it. And when I would repeat that, like in pre-med in college to my professors, they would poo-poo it and ignore it. We're not talking nutrition here. We don't do that. And so they had no interest, and that was in the 90s. That college professors in the pre-med program, these are the professors of biology, chemistry, and various aspects of medicine, had no interest in hearing about or even discussing. It was not a topic they even wanted to discuss. Was nutrition.
Yeah, well, back then everything was genetics and autoimmune. That was the big thing. That was where all the emphasis was. And in 1977, I ran into the first non-human case of cystic fibrosis, which was supposed to be a genetic disease. And when I did the investigation, I was able to find that little baby monkey that had cystic fibrosis, and I sent the slides around to experts in cystic fibrosis pathology. And I didn't tell them it was from a monkey. I just said, I think this is cystic fibrosis. What do you think? And they sent it back in their letterhead. Oh, this is a classic example of cystic fibrosis. And then when I told him it was a monkey, at first he got really excited. Oh man, we can get a colony and set up a research colony and everything. And then I told him it was caused by the investigator messing around with their diets and put too much omega-3s in the diet. They were pouring omega-3s in it by the quart per animal per day because they had dry, itchy skin. And they were causing this inflammation in the intestines, and they couldn't absorb nutrients, including the ones when you're deficient in it. You actually wind up with cystic fibrosis of the pancreas and liver, and also a deficiency on the other end. A deficiency of the omega-3s is what causes the asthma, the lung part is cystic fibrosis. So you need both of those going on at the same time to have classic cystic fibrosis. And of course, we're able to, Milan and I went to Qishan, China. We did 1,700 autopsies on kids under the age of 10 that died of this sudden heart disease that kills our young athletes. And it's caused by deficiency of selenium, which we talked about last week. But even if you're supplementing and you are eating gluten, you're still going to have the problems. Now, here's, to me, was the greatest thing we found of it. Sudden death syndrome, crib death, was supposed to be caused by mothers laying on their babies. When we investigated it, it turned out that only 2% of the babies that died of, quote, crib death, sudden death syndrome, were in bed with their mothers when they died, only 2%. Well, the other 98% died of suffocation. Well, we did autopsies, and sure enough, none of them died of suffocation. They all died of that hypertrophic cardiomyopathy heart disease. When we did those 1,700 autopsies on kids under the age of 10, 200 of those 1,700 were kids under the age of 1 year, and they would have been diagnosed with sudden death syndrome here. And to make a long story short, we went to federal courts. They forced the manufacturers of baby formulas in 2013 to put selenium into baby formulas within 6 months' time. Big headlines in the Charlotte Observer, the big newspaper from Charlotte, North Carolina. We don't know why, but sudden death syndrome has vanished in the state of North Carolina. I was just so proud of that. It was just a simple nutritional deficiency that was causing sudden death syndrome. You don't hear about that anymore. And of course, we found the cause of muscular dystrophy too. We gave that to Jerry Lewis. And he got so excited because we gave him several dozen of the charts showing how we were able to reverse muscular dystrophy in kids. He took it to the Muscular Dystrophy Association. They fired him and stopped the telethon. And so you haven't heard of crib death recently. You haven't heard of muscular dystrophy recently. You haven't heard of cystic fibrosis recently because all the baby formulas now have those nutrients in it because we sued through the federal courts.
Well, for as long as I can remember, you've been willing to talk to people for free, lecture for free, travel the world for free to give this information away. And you've put your money where your mouth is. You've walked your talk forever. And I just want to kind of rattle off some of the FDA health claims and petitions and official comments. Not only have you written and published over 70 peer-reviewed journal articles, done all this research, you've written over a dozen books on human health and nutrition. You've written that 1,200-page textbook, Diseases of Exotic Animals.
That was my thesis. Treasures. That was my thesis from the NIH $25 million research thing. And it's in the Smithsonian Institute as a national treasure. I'm very proud of that.
You should be very proud of that. I'm very proud of that. And I didn't even write it. And so it's an amazing, it is an amazing book.
Research project. It was a research project.
Absolutely. And so just some of the official comments and health claim petitions and things, I'm just going to rattle some of these off. And this list is, I think, on the wallachfiles.com as well. But, in 2010, you were part of a coalition that filed a lawsuit against the FDA in federal court to allow claims that they had initially rejected. And that had to do with prostate cancer risk reduction associated with selenium, colon cancer risk reduction, and certain cancers claim and anti-carcinogenic effects of selenium. And you filed you were part of the coalition that filed these updated claims in 2004. You were the lead plaintiff here in San Diego against the FDA, and that had to do with their restriction of because it an unconstitutional restraint on speech because it drastically limited the circumstances in which dietary supplement companies can distribute peer-reviewed literature. So in the censorship of peer-reviewed literature, you wound up suing the FDA. And I remember you used the Thomson Publishing physician's desk reference as an example that dietary supplement companies couldn't distribute the physician's desk reference to talk about the benefits of nutrients. And that one was in regards to magnesium, but there are many. And so that was here in San Diego. You were part of a coalition in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Special interest groups challenged the qualified health claims process application in conventional foods. And you actually wound up asking a federal court judge to be a co-defendant with the FDA to be able to better defend the health claim petition process that you'd been part of fighting to get approved. Let's see, there are various other issues you were co-petitioner, co-plaintiff, member of a coalition with as well, and those are listed. Comments filed with the FDA, comments supporting the Global Organization for EPA and DHA omega-3s, petition for qualified health claims concerning EPA and DHA, and reduction in blood pressure and risk of coronary heart disease. That was in 2014. Comments supporting the FDA's rulemaking proposal to revise the list of required nutrients in infant formula to include selenium. That was in 2013. Comments on FDA's advance notice of proposed rulemaking alternative for regulating qualified health claims. That was in 2004. Comments on task force for consumer health information for better nutrition in 2003. Reply comments on First Amendment issues, 2002. Comments on First Amendment issues, 2002. Comments on guidance on applying structure function rule, 2001. Petition filed with the FDA, petition for qualified health claims on selenium. In 2008, petition for qualified health claims, antioxidant vitamins C and E, and reduction in risk of site-specific cancers. That was in 2008. Petition for the modification of disease connotations to include structure function claims with disclaimers that eliminate perceived disease connotations. 2004, petition for health claims, lycopene and tomato-based foods containing lycopene and a reduction in the risk of certain cancers. 2004, petition for amended health claim, omega-3 fatty acids, coronary heart disease. You were the lead and co-petitioner, 2003. Petition for health claims, selenium, and reduction in risk of certain cancers in 2002. It goes on and on and on, and that's kind of a representative sample. But I mean, you've been doing this for as far back as I can remember, and you've used different formats, whether it's audio cassette tapes that were of your lectures. It was free lectures to a group of 1 to 100,000 people at a time. It was all these different ways of getting this information out. And so, now I think, because of what's going on with the news media and the coronavirus, and it's affecting people around the world, and you're constantly hearing the underlying conditions. But underlying conditions, what they're really talking about are nutritional deficiency diseases for the most part.
You get an A+, that's exactly right. And that's what I'm saying. You need to get rid of these pre-existing conditions.
I've only been in this school for, 53 years. So.
We need to get rid of these pre-existing conditions, and that's going to be my radio monologue today. And so this is perfect timing. Give me a chance to practice a little bit here.
But this has been your mission, your fight forever is.
Well, it's been my mission since 1961 when I ran into the first mass off. I was a pathology student at University of Missouri, 1961. I ran into the first mass die-off in America from pollution. It was Christmas. All the professors were gone. I figured it out myself by taking blood samples and water samples and all this kind of stuff, and did the complete autopsies on 50 bodies. They brought me 50 bodies, okay? Written it up, 500 died in one night, and it was published in 2 scientific journals. I'm only 21 years old. And that was what was used to get the $25 million grant from the NIH. Marlon Perkins recognized the value. He was the director of the St. Louis Zoo. Marlon Perkins, okay, and he was on TV, okay, with the Wild Kingdom and kind of stuff. And he took that. I mean, I just published. I was so excited to have it published in 2 scientific journals. Well, he took those articles and he took them to NIH and got a $25 million grant. I was in Africa on the White Rhino Conservation Project. And he sent me a letter and said, okay, I got $25 million for this project. You're going to be the pathologist. I'll come back right now. In 10 years, we did 20,000 autopsies, 17,000 and some change, over 454 species of zoo animals and 3,000 humans, millions of chemistries, and proved that none of these diseases that were said to be genetic and autoimmune disease were. They were all just nutritional deficiencies. And that's why my thesis is in the Smithsonian Institute, because it created a new science which has replaced genetics, which is epigenetics. So I'm very, very proud of that.
Absolutely. And, epigenetics has now made it into the mainstream nomenclature. I was, over the weekend, watched a new sitcom, and the comedian was in his sitcom talking about epigenetics and gave a really good definition of epigenetics. And I was very impressed. But, when you started all of this, the word I don't think existed. And so
it did not exist. They made up the word after my 10-year study with those 20,000 autopsies. The word came out then.
Yeah. And so, I anytime I give a tour of longevity to somebody, I show them that book. That was your thesis. But, I talk about how, you put that book together for, over 20 years. You started writing it, I think, in 64, maybe it was 61. Maybe I've been telling people 20, it was 20, yeah. 23, 24 years. But, you stuck with that project all through life. You had us 4 kids, single father of us 4 kids at various times.
For 4 years.
Different city every couple of years, different zoo every couple of years. Then a new degree, back to school, teaching the discovery on cystic fibrosis in that monkey. Yet you kept writing that book, and so people think you're maybe sometimes a crazy veterinarian or a crazy naturopath or a crazy guy that just talks nutrition. You're one of those crazy vitamin guys. But the reality is you have 3 higher education degrees. You're a comparative pathologist, graduate student, and I tell people this all the time. You not only read the research, you not only did the type of research that most people do, which is reading and understanding and learning through reading, but you actually did it. You actually, with your own hands and your own eyes, were there and did it. And so Dr. Schrauzer, I know that he always spoke so highly of you on many topics, but that was one of the things that I think impressed him the most about you always, that he would always tell me, was that you were responsible for the original research. So you actually did it. You lived it. You were the man in the arena. You weren't the guy in the stands reading it. And so, it's just
well, thank you for bringing those things up.
Yeah, well, it's true. And but that book for 20, who can stick with a project like that, as monotonous and tedious as that was, with all that you dealt with for over 20 years, almost 25 years. And I also explained to people your commitment to getting that information out. It was never ending. It was resolute. It was absolute. But you stuck with it through thick and thin. And you have to kind of remember what was happening back then. People tend to forget that, if you're my age, you remember the manual typewriters, and you remember no spell check.
Underwood.
You remember no Google and no Siri. And so, not only did you, no cell phones, no smartphones. So to write that book with all that was going on, I remember you sitting at the kitchen table with a manual typewriter and writing letters to send off to ask for, additional things for that book, or hours and hours and hours, days on the telephone of you having those conversations to complete that book. And so, today we all have Google and Siri at our fingertips. Back then, not only to write that book did you have to type with 2 fingers and no spell check on a manual typewriter, but you had to actually write all the things to get the information to put in that book, and to all the verifications and all the resources and citations, and it was never ending.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And of course, just briefly, if I may, the thing that was unique, the thing that made me one of the 2 fathers, along with what's his face, for the being fathers of the science of epigenetics, we're talking about Bruce Lipton. Okay, he works with identical twins that get separated in the first year of life, and they go to different places, and 30 years later they connect and find out the differences and the similarities. Identical twins. I took 100 eggs from the same mother-father chicken in 6 weeks. They would lay the eggs, we'd seal them, put them in the freezer. They'd lay more eggs, they'd steal them, put them in the freezer. Lay more eggs. We got 100. We'd put them into 4 groups of 25. Gave each group a different, hatched them all at the same time, so they're exactly the same birth date. And for 6 weeks, we gave 4 different groups of 25 each, 4 different diets. Then killed them all within 5 minutes. And of course, did the autopsies on them and published that. The differences between those babies, even though they had the same mother, father, the same hatching period, the same everything, the same food for the mother and father, because it was different for 6 weeks of the food they consumed and the vitamins and minerals they consumed. I mean, it was like night and day between those 4 different groups. And that was written up and published in 2 scientific journals also. And that became the basis of the science of epigenetics. It's in the book, Rare Earths and Cures. It's in the book, Dead Doctors Don't Lie. And it's in the book, Epigenetics, and also obviously in the book, Rare Earths and Cures, as the pictures of those 4 different groups of birds.
I remember that picture well. Yeah, it's in Rare Earths, and I think it's in Diseases of Exotic Animals as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's in epigenetics?
Yes. And so it's one of those things where, again, we got to get rid of these pre-existing conditions, and then nobody will die from the coronavirus. We got to get rid of the pre-existing conditions, get rid of all the bad foods, the fried foods, the processed meats, the oils of all kinds, get rid of the gluten, wheat, brought around oats, and then get rid of sugar, and then take the 90 essential nutrients appropriate for body weight. And if you have pre-existing conditions, we have all these secret sauces that you add to it. So you don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a nurse. You don't have to be a pharmacist. You don't have to be a technician. You can be somebody. I have people, Steve, who deal with 500,000 people, customers and distributors in their downline. They are 9th grade graduates. They're dealing with 500,000 people a year because they have access to these books and CDs and DVDs and so forth. We even have an audio book. If you can't read, we have an audio book, Dead Doctors Don't Lie, where you can go online and buy the audio book, and you're driving, you listen to the book, or if you can't read, you sit at home and listen to it, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Sanjeev and I just did one of these Zoom calls on, I think, Friday, and we talked about the longevity health quiz. And so all of that has all of that kind of knowledge wrapped up into basically the logic or the algorithms or the GUI interface. And so people have that technology now at their fingertips where they don't need you or me right there telling them what to talk to people about, because the health quiz prompts people through the use of it to where they can do kind of a self-evaluation. So all those things, again, technology is an amazing thing. So now people have all of that. And like I said, 20, 30, 40 years ago, they didn't have any of those things.
Well, now we have prepackaged programs with secret sauces for over 900 different diseases and combinations. And usually, Steve, when people have a nutritional deficiency, they won't have just a vitamin C deficiency and have scurvy. When people have, and people, and everybody knows their grandpa or maybe an auntie or maybe an uncle or somebody like that, or a brother or sister that has high blood pressure, diabetes, arthritis, low thyroid. They've got liver issues. They may have visual problems, got ringing in the ears, and they got 6, 8, 10 problems, all because they have a gluten issue. They're not absorbing, even though they're supplementing, because, as you point out very well, thank you, you're a good student, that just eating stuff isn't enough. You have to be able to absorb it and employ it.
Absolutely. Just one thing before we wrap up, one of the hottest topics of the last few years, even though it's a 100-year-old diet, is the ketogenic diet. And we're talking, primarily reducing bad things like carbs, bad carbs. There's good carbs, there's bad carbs, but bad, foods like bad sugars and things like that. And then
no gluten,
eliminating bad fats, right? And so, but
no
there's
gluten.
Good fats. No gluten, but I personally like taking the EFAs just as an added source of good fats, because it's the good fats. It's the fats that support your cardiovascular system, your brain, like you said, that good fat. And so, if you just, instead of consuming a Snickers bar in the afternoon, consume a couple of those EFAs, you're getting a gram of good fat, and it's good for you as well. So you really, you almost can't overdo the good fats, right? When it comes to EPA and DHA, I mean,
eliminate the blood clots by doing that. I want to throw one more thing out here, if I
Sure.
may, and that is that when you are going to get rid of the bad stuff, you have to appreciate what the Italians and the Germans do. They're neighboring countries. The Italians are the second they have the second highest rate of coronavirus infections. They have the highest rate of deaths, 10% of those infected die in Italy. And the Germans, right next door to them, they're number 5 out of 186 nations. So they're number 2 and number 5. The Germans are number 5. And yet they have the lowest rate of deaths from the coronavirus, 0.5%. That's because the Germans eat everything as potatoes and corn and rice. And the Italians eat everything as gluten, pasta, spaghetti, mac and cheese, bread.
But it tastes so good.
Well, if you're willing to give up half your life to eat a pizza, go for it.
There you go. All right. Well, we're going to wrap this one up, and I'm sure we'll do more. But thank you for your time, as always. Thank you for being on today. And we'll talk to you soon. Everybody stay safe.
Bye-bye.